communities in Jefferson County. Tonight, we're going to be focused on development strategies. And I want to take a moment to ground us in the here. Um, we acknowledge that these waters, mountains, valleys, and shorelines are the traditional territory of the S'Klallam and Chimicum indigenous people. So in our last webinar, we looked at the challenges to building affordable housing and how tiny home communities might address these challenges in general. And tonight we're going to be focusing on some of these innovations in greater depth, particularly financing and the development process solutions. All of the strategies that we are presenting are based on the idea that if we really want affordable housing for all, we need to come together as a community to resource each other. All the affordable housing that we need will not be coming down from above, but instead the community will need to provide for itself. So going back to our first webinar, when developing a community, you begin with the understanding of the types of tiny houses there are. One of the most basic questions concerning tiny homes is where can you put one? Where can I put one if I have one? And where that is dependent mainly on what standard it's built to and who permits and inspects it, as well as the zoning laws. So any tiny house that's built to the IRC standard, that stands for International Residential Code, can go anywhere a conventional house goes because the IRC is the standard for conventional houses. Most of us are familiar with the idea of tiny house through tiny house on wheels, which is where the movement began. If you're going to build to a standard, you're going to be either building to the IRC or the ANSI standard. And sometimes we refer to those ANSI standard built houses as tiny house RVs because that's the RV standard. Um, so if you're not building to a standard, then it's not going to be permittable as a permanent dwelling. I think everybody should understand that. And the trade-off between the different types of houses that you see here on the screen is the tiny house and foundations, skid built, tiny house, and tiny house RV is how movable it is versus how flexible the design is and how much it costs. Now, if you're building to the IRC conventional home standard, it's going to be much more expensive than if you're building to the ANSI standard. Also, on the other hand, you have a greater design flexibility. So if you're building a tiny house on a foundation, it doesn't have to hold to certain width and height requirements to be able to drive it down the road. So with that, I'm going to go on to zoning requirements by community type. The basic variables here are the type of tiny house, the size of the community, the allowable density, that's the zoning code. And in Port Townsend and in Jefferson County, the Hadlock Irondale area, they allow for much more density than the rural residential, which is basically one primary dwelling per 5 acres. And the reason for that, of course, is preserving farmland. So those are the trade-offs between, city and county building. And another variable is what type of permit is required. So basically, as you increase in size, the kind of permit that you need for the community itself gets more complicated. For a backyard community, you really don't have to put in a community plan per se, although you're going to submit a permit for your ADU. With your cottage housing development, You have an administrative review of your community plan, and that's an option that's available in Port Townsend. And then finally, for the plan unit development, that's a much longer, more rigorous process. Um, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. I'm going to use the framework tonight of the development process and community size to discuss the various development strategies. So a simplified development process might look something like the steps on this slide, but I want to emphasize this is not a linear process, and you might not even begin with the first step of community vision. You might start with your land, such as you already own an existing house and you want to put ADUs on it. So it could be complicated and it can be reiterative, and one decision, one point might affect an earlier decision and you go back. So it is a complex process. Um, Also, when you're forming a community, there are some additional steps, such as community recruitment and deciding on the community structure and then the agreements that you might not find typical in the development process that's done by a developer. So, turning to community size, let's start with the smallest and simplest, the backyard communities. The design concept is 2 to 3 units per lot. And that would be one primary house plus 1 or 2 ADUs. At the current time, only one ADU is permitted, but you could also have a detached bedroom, which has a slightly different configuration. Um, this is as far as the strategies, this is the only type of community that isn't entirely requiring new development. You can build an ADU in the backyard. We tend to think of the house owner as the one that builds the ADU and then rents out the ADU. But there are other possibilities here. And for example, the primary house owner could lease a space in the backyard and you could bring in a tiny house on wheels that was built to IRC and anchor it down. And so you could just do the land leasing, and then the tiny house dweller is the one that owns the house. Or another thing that when you think about people who are wanting to, older people who are wanting to downsize and perhaps age in place, maybe they want to build an ADU for themselves and then rent out the primary house to a younger family that that could use this space. So those are some of the strategies having to do with small backyard units. And we have 2 people to talk to us tonight about some of the financial strategies that are related to ADUs and some bigger developments. But Rachel Williams is the finance manager for Habitat for Humanity of East Jefferson County. She's been with them since 2007 and been the finance manager since 2013. And Rachel is passionate about creating vibrant and resilient rural communities. And we've been lucky to have her in Port Townsend, although she just moved to San Juan. But we're still glad that she's here with Habitat. And then Jane Lowry Armstrong is going to be telling us about some of the community investment strategies for housing that she is working with the Housing Solutions Network in bringing online here in um, so, and then going on to medium-sized cottage developments. This is the 4 to 12 units, and they have common areas and usually perimeter parking, shared amenities. It does not require a special plan unit development agreement, although the community plan has to be administratively reviewed, in this case by the city planning department. So relevant strategies, I think target demographics is an important one. This could be, for example, a model for older adult living, people who are wanting community as they get older. And it serves, the model serves those people with too much income for subsidized living, but who can't afford, the entrance fees and other costs associated with the life plan communities, the ones that are done by developers. One interesting community that I read about recently was a school district in Arizona that assisted in building a tiny home community for the teachers in their school district who were unable to afford houses on their teacher's salary. And what the school district did was it gave school district land to the project. And so this is the idea of anchor community helping to develop workforce housing. And I think that's particularly of interest to Housing Solutions Network here, where we've been talking about the need for workforce housing. And then as far as the financial strategies and the community structure, we're going to talk about um, a shared ownership model tonight. And we're lucky to have both Victoria O'Bannon and Fred Medicott from the Northwest Cooperative Development Center to talk about this model. They will introduce a strategy to create permanently affordable tiny home communities through housing cooperatives. And Victoria has a wealth of experience in affordable housing, and Fred has been providing assistance to resident owned communities since 2017. So, and then finally, the larger plan communities, these use many of the same strategies as the cottage developments, but scaled up. Um, the existing planned communities tend to lie at either end of the scales of affordability, with very high-end communities built by developers. And then we have those designed for the housing precarious, that focuses on low income and permanently affordable. And one of the reasons for that is putting in infrastructure for brand new greenfield development is pretty expensive. Um, so in the latter case, the goal is to produce resident-owned housing that is permanently affordable to households earning between 30 to 60% of area median income, with similar or smaller public subsidy levels compared to rental housing that targets the same income levels. So almost all the apartment building and that rental low income development is not about 90% of the federal public dollars are targeted towards that. So the public financing, as I said, can go towards putting in that infrastructure for these greenfield developments. And this is an example of Cottage Grove in Oregon, and they just recently opened their tiny home community. And the average uh, housing payment that they put down each month towards their collective mortgage is between $350 a month and $450 a month. So this is truly affordable. So finally, I want to talk about a strategy that applies across all scales of development, which is co-development. And for me, co-development is this idea of helping each other work through the development process. And the purpose, we can put together a housing resource collective to do that, and where we bring together the diverse skills, know-how, and resources needed to design and build sustainably affordable housing. And we are so fortunate this evening to have Teresa Baker, who founded What is Such Collective, here to tell us her story. Teresa is a co-founder and president of the board of directors for Latch Collective in Los Angeles, as well as a state chapter leader with American Tiny House Association and a builder of her own tiny DIY house. She has a background in urban planning, is trained in carpentry, builds affordable housing as a crew leader for Habitat for Humanity, and has a passion for teaching and community building. So I am now going to turn over the presentation to Rachel.
Thank you, Vicki. It's great to be here. As Vicki said, I'm currently the finance manager for Habitat for Humanity of East Jefferson County. I started my Habitat career in affordable housing work, actually doing construction as a AmeriCorps Vista, and then as the construction manager with Habitat in Port Townsend. And in between there, went back to school and completed an MBA from Bainbridge Graduate Institute and did some consulting work and teaching entrepreneurs around helping with startup businesses. So actually a lot of what I'm talking about tonight draws as much or more from that experience talking to entrepreneurs about sources of financing and capital as it relates to my experience with Habitat. So what I want to do tonight, I only have a few minutes, and this is going to be a very high level overview of, I think of it as sort of like how to be an educated consumer of financing. So how to think about your options for raising money for whatever variety of project you might be looking at, and understand kind of some of the key distinctions and pros and cons. So to start out with, always the sort of most straightforward, but sometimes least accessible option is just using your own money. If you have savings to be able to finance a project, that is by far and away the most straightforward way to go. Gives you all of the options and flexibility. You're not answering to anybody else outside of obviously, permitting and zoning and those sorts of things. The next option that I want to mention is it's other people's money that becomes your money. So things like crowdfunding campaign, where you're essentially asking people to give you money to fund a project. Applying for grants would also fall into this category. Both of those things come with a lot of work and certain kinds of commitments, whether that's grant reporting, the effort that it takes to build a successful crowdfunding campaign, following up with your supporters, that sort of thing. So neither of those sources of money are free, but they do come with the benefit that you do not have to pay them back. And then what I want to spend the most time talking about is debt, is different forms of getting a loan to finance your tiny home project. And there's a lot of different colors and flavors within that debt category. So that's where I want to spend most of the time. And here's where the type of project and the type of home is going to play a role in what kind of financing is available. Starting with thinking back to Vicki's slide that talked about the different kinds of tiny homes, from a tiny home on a foundation to a skid built to on wheels. Those things are going to have a serious impact on financing. So for example, if you own a home with a lot that has the capacity to build an ADU, and you're building on a tiny home ADU on a foundation, that's probably going to be the most likely to qualify for conventional financing, such as a construction loan or potentially a home equity line of credit if you have sufficient equity in that existing home. Then as you move towards the other end of the spectrum, if you're building something on wheels, that's going to be more akin to an RV or a vehicle. And the key distinction between those from the perspective of a lender is a residence on a foundation that's tied to property generally appreciates in value over time. That's not guaranteed. Crazy things happen in the housing market, but that's generally the trend. And so lenders are much more willing to finance something that's likely to appreciate in value versus a car. You can also get a car loan, but they generally lose value from the minute you drive them off the dealership lot. So the terms of that loan are going to be different. And that's sort of similar. If you think about, that's a similar distinction between different kinds of tiny homes. Are they going to be treated more like a regular house that's on a foundation tied to the lot, or is it going to be treated more like a vehicle? So that was my 5-minute timer to keep me on track. So I'll just wrap up quickly and run through a couple other options. From the lender's perspective, they're going to be looking at two things. One is there collateral? Is there an asset that they could potentially repossess and sell to make good on the loan if you don't make your payments? But the other really primary thing that they're going to be looking at is what's the income stream that you're going to be using to repay that loan. And so there's a number of types of loans, like getting a personal loan from a bank or even using credit cards that are just strictly based on your capacity to repay. And they're not really looking at what you're spending that money on. Now, those do come with significantly higher interest rates and terms. So I don't necessarily advise, building a tiny home and putting it all on a credit card. That's probably not a very good idea. But that's just kind of the other end of the spectrum of financing. And so whatever kind of financing you're looking at, if you're looking at debt financing, you want to pay attention to what's the interest rate, what's the repayment schedule, what's your plan for how you're going to make those payments, and then sort of what's the contingencies, what happens if you don't make the payments. And just a couple last options, similar to buying a car, you may find, Vicki mentioned this to me, it's not something that I'm personally familiar with, that some builders of tiny homes will actually extend financing. So you can purchase a home through a payment plan from the builder, similar to you might get a financing from a car dealership. And then the last thing is a private loan from other individuals or community organizations. And that is what Jane is going to talk to you about. So that's it for me. Thanks.
That's a great lead in. Our housing group is Neighborly Rentals, and we're at the stage, as it's relevant to tiny homes, at looking for 3 homeowner projects or local projects to fund with local lenders that will build affordable housing or increase the base of affordable rentals for local workforce and residents. And we're going in this discussion in the model of Lion, which is a local lending network, and it connects local people who want to invest locally with people with business proposals or businesses needing capital investment. Right now, we've identified 2 ways that we can most likely help people in the tiny home or ADU area. And one of those is to be a bridge loan. And that could be where someone doesn't want to go out and get a conventional mortgage or take a line of credit or take on that financing that has to start being repaid. And we could provide individuals who will provide that funding through the construction phase. And at the end, the homeowner would go, or the person who's assuming that debt will go and arrange conventional or other financing. The second way would be where we would do a no to low interest loan, or have individuals who would during the construction phase, and then that the repayment would start when the unit becomes rentable and the homeowner or owner has the ability to start to collect rent to pay back the loan, likely in 3 to 6 years. The network doesn't dictate the terms or the way that this would be structured. We find individuals and that come together, and it becomes a broader working relationship. The rental that we have in mind that we'd like to see would be in the $300 to $1,200 a month range. And so we work with the individual to see what they will qualify for, what works to make their project viable, and if all those pieces can come together. And the final deal is really between the lender and the person who is executing the project. As Vicki said, we need them to be permittable in order that it go forward. I've got a letter with, if you wanted more information or to explore whether your project might be one that would fit with what we're trying to help support in the community. That'll be coming out from Vicki in notes after this meeting. And looking quickly over my notes. But we're really interested in building the vibrancy and also then to have the story of success, to work with individuals and how you see the project here in Jefferson County, most likely with homeowners or homeowner properties and ADUs or units that are going to be on those properties. So I'll stop there.
All right, so I think that we are up next. Fred, is that correct? Let me go ahead and share my screen here so you guys can see our PowerPoint. All right, Fred, go for it.
No, you're starting.
Oh, I apologize. My name is Victoria O'Banion, and I am with the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, along with my colleague, Fred. Fred, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Fred.
Thank you, Fred. So a little bit about who we are in the Northwest Cooperative Development Center. The Northwest Cooperative Development Center is a regional nonprofit that supports cooperatives across Washington State, Northern Idaho, Alaska, and Hawaii. We actually also support cooperatives in Oregon as well. We support all different types of cooperatives, including housing, worker, producer, and consumer cooperatives. Fred and myself work specifically in the Rock Northwest program. Rock Northwest is an affiliate of Rock USA, which is a national nonprofit that works with manufactured housing communities through the process of acquisition to provide resident-owned communities. So these are residential-owned housing cooperatives in manufactured housing communities. We have currently over 15 communities that we serve in Washington State and support. We've been doing this program since 2016, and we have represented over $23 million in transactions. So that's just a little bit about who we are and our foundation of knowledge. Fred.
Yeah, and I'll also say, so we're in this ROC program, but the Northwest Cooperative Development Center itself has existed for like 40 odd years, and they do cooperative development more broadly. I know Victoria touched on that, but I feel like that gets lost sometimes. So I'm not totally sure how familiar everybody is with the model, but I thought I'd just run through it. So technically a cooperative is an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. That's what the International Cooperative Alliance, that's how they define it. That's the top level international association of co-ops. In housing co-ops specifically, it can look all sorts of different ways. You can have a situation where the land, which in the manufactured housing community work that we do, the cooperative purchases the property, the land, and then the individual families own their homes. You can have a housing cooperative where the homes are owned by the co-op. The members are like renting members or leasing members. They're renting from the co-op, and then the land is actually long-term leased from somebody else. You could have a situation where the cooperative, the whole thing, the property and the structures are owned by the cooperative. So it's pretty flexible as far as that goes. The co-op piece is really the ownership and the governance model. So it's less about how you, the co-op piece, I guess, is less about how you get to the point where you have all the structures and more about what do you do after that. The development of the organization happens alongside that process. Will you go to the next slide? Yeah. So, so different kinds of housing co-ops. There's an organization called NASCO, which is the National Association for Student Cooperative. Can't remember what the O stands for, but they do student co-ops, and most of theirs are either the cooperative owns the structure or the cooperative long-term rents the structure and the members are renters. You can have housing co-ops that are just multifamily units, you know, a 3-story home with 3 different families in it. They all co-own it. You can have apartment complexes, condominiums, and then obviously tiny home communities, or even whole subdivisions sometimes. They're single family homes with yards or owned and operated as cooperatives. Next slide. So the co-op development process is pretty similar to what Vicki described for the tiny home development process. You've got to identify a need. So folks need homes, affordable homes. Then you've got to find a core group of folks who are kind of going to push the boulder up the hill. And those are the folks that will really shape what the organization is going to look like at the beginning. And that initial shape tends to hold, you know, for decades. So that early piece is really important, and it's really important if you're forming a cooperative that you find your initial group of folks has a pretty clear vision. Otherwise, you can sort of end up with a muddled organizational structure that won't serve you very well. And then just like Vicki's saying, you know, you do the economic justification, we call it. So that's figuring out, is it going to pencil? You know, if you can get your financing and the property costs this much and the construction costs this much, what are you going to have to charge every month for a membership fee or a lot fee? So just sort of basic business sense stuff, assuming you can show on paper that it makes sense and it can pay for itself. So yeah, I guess I should say that a cooperative is not a nonprofit. It's not a for-profit business either, but a cooperative has to generate enough revenue to cover its own expenses and provide whatever the benefit to its membership is that it's intended to. So in this case, affordable housing. So the enterprise part of the cooperative does have to be structured such that it's at least generating enough to keep itself going. If you're getting into a situation where you know you're going to rely on outside capital, you're usually better served by the nonprofit model. And then once you know it's going to pencil, you start doing your organizational design. That's your articles of incorporation. That's what makes the co-op real in the eyes of the state. Kind of gives the very top level basic rules. Who gets a say in what does it take to dissolve the cooperative? How is the equity structure going to work? I'll talk about that in just a second. And then your bylaws is really sort of the rules and the processes for how the co-op is going to go. And in housing cooperatives, that's things like, how do you adjudicate disputes about too many cats, but also how much money can, so typically in a cooperative, what you do is the membership elects a board of directors. I think this is on the next slide, but typically they'll elect the board of directors. Board of directors oversees the sort of day-to-day, month-to-month management of the park. And so your bylaws include things like how much money can the board of directors spend without having to go to the membership. So the membership approves the budget every year, but we had a tree fall down. You know, at what point can the board of directors make that expenditure with everyone's money? What point does the membership need to have a say? And so the whole point of the cooperative model, or one of the points of the cooperative model, is to give everybody a say and to make sure that sort of that collective resource is being used in the way that's going to serve, you know, the most people the best. And then, yeah, the capital raising, everything everybody else has said, in a cooperative model, there's a couple other ways you can potentially raise capital. There are some lenders specifically for co-ops that usually do more favorable terms, or at least will take on projects that seem like they're going to be less profitable. But there's also different sort of equity raising schemes that you can do through either your membership, or actually you can sell preferred shares, which is sort of like a low return, really stable form of stock that does not give a voting interest. That is not exactly a donation, but it takes kind of a really motivated lender, like the kind of folks who would operate through a Lion. But that's another way that you can raise capital. Next slide. Oh yeah, do you want to, Victoria, and then, so do you want to talk about the ROC model specifically?
Yeah, so I can talk a little quickly through the ROC model. So what we do most frequently when we're talking about cooperative housing is we apply this model and what Fred just talked about to manufactured housing communities. So we work with sellers of manufactured housing communities to acquire them through an acquisition process. And then we work alongside the residents of that community to go through that entire cooperative conversion process that Fred just said. So while they are acquiring and during the 120 days of acquisition, they are forming their cooperative. So while that process that Fred just talked through can seem long and daunting and a lot, it actually can be done in 120 days if you focus and if you're out there every week working with the board of directors to pass those policies. So that's just a kind of a high level of what we do. Here's a little bit about the acquisition process that we go through. Less relevant to this conversation, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that in this specific model, we as an organization are actually the ones doing the negotiation with the seller, and we don't go to the residents and even propose the idea of a cooperative until we've got a contract with the seller, so we've already arrived at a price. So this ROC model specifically, the organizational model and the development model is really strong, but it's also tied to this specific kind of financing strategy that probably wouldn't apply to tiny home communities. I just want to make that clear.
And then that's everything. And I think we're at 10 minutes.
Yep. So let's
All right.
on my little time timer.
Anything else to add, Fred?
Please contact us if you have more questions. I guess we should have said that, yeah, so what we do is we get grant funding from mostly the Department of Agriculture to do co-op development in USDA designated rural areas. So if you've got a housing cooperative project or you've got an affordable housing project that you're wondering might the cooperative model fit for this, please reach out to us because we can help you through the process of developing the cooperative. And we can help with the organizational cooperative development piece and also with finding financing and doing the business planning and stuff. We do both sides.
And that was your timer.
Well done. Thank you for sticking on time. I'm gonna also try to do my best at that. Let me share my presentation. Thanks for having me, everybody. Tonight, I hope to share with you some lessons for my organization, Latch Collective, and using connections and collaborations to make change. So specifically highlighting legalization, basically the history of advocacy that I was involved with movable tiny homes in Los Angeles, and then the formation of our cooperative Latch Collective. But first, a little bit about me, just because it's a fun story. I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Studied regional and urban planning and Indigenous studies, and that's where I first found out about tiny homes many years ago. People talking about tiny homes in the education, but they were not taken seriously as a concept that could be used for housing back, like to help with housing issues back in like 2013. No one was really taking anything seriously. So I thought if we could legalize them and just have more options to actually get them within our zoning bylaws, perhaps more people could be taking these seriously. I moved up to Fairbanks, Alaska to be with my partner, and we ended up trying out tiny living by living in a cabin with no running water for a year, and that was a great experience to figure out, yes, we could do tiny and want to continue with our tiny home dreams. And she was in the military at the time, so that brought us to Los Angeles, California, where basically all my tiny home dreams came true. Really had a crash course in learning construction skills through carpentry school and getting involved with Habitat for Humanity. Now I work there as a crew leader and forming Latch Collective and everything. So that's where I am, but I potentially will be joining you all in the future. Shayna, my wife, is from Olympia, and her family every year went to Solduck or multiple times a year, and are very familiar with the peninsula. And I actually, every time I visit, I never got to go to that area. And this summer, took a road trip and in a van that Shane and I converted and went to visit her family, and basically looked around and really fell in love, and are trying to see if we can live in the area in the future. So we're hoping to move to the peninsula after we finish our tiny house that we're currently building. So let me just chat a little bit about the beginnings of forming a community and cooperative, and what type of community and cooperative I'm a part of. So, you know, when I moved to Los Angeles, I basically knew that I would like to start a cooperative with people interested in building tiny homes. I wanted to build my own tiny home. I knew I couldn't do it by myself, and was hoping to form connections. So I did it really simple grassroots effort of just creating a meetup group and seeing who's out there and who I could possibly connect with. From that, you know, I ended up, my planning nerd came out, and I wanted to share what skills and knowledge I had on Los Angeles's zoning and bylaw codes, because I had done a bunch of research. And so I was just giving like free workshops and webinars, just like Viki's giving now, which is really awesome. And basically through that got really pushed to get involved in advocacy, even though I hadn't really had a lot of experience in that. But different people coming out to the workshops and webinars were really pushing me to do things at a bigger level, which I was pretty uncomfortable with at first. But you know, basically when you realize you have a mission, you kind of have to step up to the plate. So I became involved with different advocacy organizations such as American Tiny House Association, and helps people understand what these issues were and how we could overcome them. And through that, I was also surveying others through this initial kind of meetups and workshops. I was surveying others, like, would you be interested in a cooperative that would build tiny homes? Or are you interested in building your own tiny homes? Or what services are you looking for? So basically surveying what other people wanted to and what they'd be willing to help with, so that I would know like who would be potentially a part of this. I didn't want to start this thing without anyone interested, right? So just a reflection of that. We really started as a grassroots formation. I had an initial vision, but meeting with others helped me, you know, develop the vision further, and surveying an existing interest in the vision was really critical and crucial to having success in the future, making sure that there were stakeholders that were interested and involved, but also looking into existing efforts, other advocates and other organizations doing work in this area. And then it became into formally organizing. We started Latch Collective as basically a company, an LLC, just my wife and I, but from the beginning realized that, well, we wanted it to be a community effort. So we had goals to become a cooperative, but it was a process, right? So people that were coming out regularly, we wanted to share our skills and knowledge with each other and get to the point where we could help each other build our tiny homes. So, you know, we have Isabel here on the left, like has skills with working with small spaces. She was kind of had her own fame and fortune in the YouTube world about working on tiny homes. It's LA. And then Tony, who had a ton of technical skills in plumbing and electrical. So, and Stephen, who was building his own tiny homes at the time. These are all now co-op member owners of our organization, but they were people who were coming out and interested in what we were doing and just showing up and helping others and really being a part of this community building. So I'm going to get into the advocacy story a little bit. At one of our meetings where we were just kind of talking about the potentials of Latch Collective and building community, it happened to be, you know, we were low budget. We were meeting in basically a bar, and that happens to look like Washington on the inside, but this was a bar in LA, and we were talking about tiny homes, and a guy was kind of hovering at the table, a very well-dressed business suit guy, and it was awkward. So at one point I turned and I was like, hello, can I help you? And it happened to be the senior planner whose job it was to create the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. And I actually knew who he was because I was a super nerd about researching all the planning department stuff, but I was too shy to like reach out to him and talk about tiny homes, even though I knew wanted him to basically legalize tiny homes within the ADU ordinance. So I had goals, but I was too shy to reach out. And here he was at the table that I was offering, because I went out there and shared a vision and idea, and he heard. So he gave me his business card, and we ended up, I ended up going to the city of Los Angeles a few times and basically creating a strategy with him, but then also other tiny home advocates, to convince the rest of the city, basically city council and the committee of planners that were making decisions on this, to incorporate language for movable tiny homes within an existing ordinance. It was already written, and we kind of had missed the date, kind of like we were a little bit past the point where it was in the creation stage. It already existed, but with a lot of effort and people showing up to the meetings, we basically convinced them to create an amendment to the existing ordinance, and we made it easy for them. We drafted all of how the technicalities would work and suggested the language for them, and basically they agreed at one meeting that they should include this additional language based on the comments at a public meeting. And it wasn't just as easy as that. We had invited city staff to come and see tiny homes and really get them comfortable with the idea of what it meant, and done a lot of talking to the officials. And it took a while, because that ordinance was really in limbo with, there's always politics. It wasn't necessarily the tiny homes itself. We didn't have a lot of pushback on that, which was awesome, but the ADU ordinance itself took a long time to pass. But this past year, last December now, we celebrated the legalization of movable tiny homes. So it really was a community-driven effort, and that is something that we were really that was basically an obstacle we realized. We couldn't go forward with, building tiny homes and helping people live in tiny homes if there wasn't anywhere to legally place them. So that was one of the barriers we recognized and worked on before we moved forward really with our cooperative. Another place was that we wanted to work on building our tiny homes, but didn't have a space to build them. So through networking, this was a picture on the left, we were doing small projects, and this was just in people's backyards and where we had space. But we tried to network and find space to build. And at LA Eco Village, if anyone's heard of them, I was at one networking event and met someone who was an artist who basically agreed to give us space in exchange for a labor return, helping her with different projects on her property. And that really worked out for us for many years. We had this space that we were able to affordably have people build their tiny homes for low rent, which is really hard to find in Los Angeles, a covered space with room for access to restrooms and shade. So it was basically coming through a lot of networking and community connections. Here's just a picture of my own tiny home that we co-built together. So our community, this is kind of still in the works phase of this tiny home, but our community coming together to build our tiny homes with our various skills and knowledge. When I started my tiny home, I had limited construction experience. Now I have a lot more. But there were people like Tony and Isabel and Stephen who could show up, and our wider community who also wanted to learn those skills. We were using our shared resources to help each other achieve our dreams, which is really why we're cooperative. We have a shared goal, and profit isn't our main driver, but wanting to live in tiny homes and learn about how they work and have experience building is our goal. So basically, once we had that proof of concept, when we were able to show what co-building was and how we could generate money as a business, we opened it up to cooperative membership, and the people who had been involved with our community forming, we basically had a few retreats, and it took a few years, and we really, what the group before was talking about, hashed out our operating agreement and figured out our leadership structure and how things would work, and together formed all these rules and regulations. And then, we had set in the first year 14, I think, owning members pay an ownership member fee and become an owning member of our cooperative. So our model is that we operate as a cooperative business. If there are profits, they get distributed among us, but our main intention is, to learn from each other and share resources, while we hope to make a profit to basically recognize the time that is put in from our co-op owner members. So yeah, this was a picture of us celebrating our 1 year membership our 1 year as a cooperative celebration. And so just kind of some reflections from that time. And feel free to give me a little heads up on the chat if I'm over time, because I'm not doing a great job. I forgot to start my timer. But some lessons from that time were identifying what strengths were actually in our group. I'll talk in a little bit about all these goals that we want to do, all these problems that we want to solve, but we have the strengths that exist within our community, and let's try to build on those strengths. But also, what are our barriers to actually achieving what we want to achieve? One might be experience, but legal barriers for what we want to do, and really working on those before starting a cooperative and organizing as a group and getting more people to financially commit any money or time when there's not really like a way to achieve or get over those barriers, right? So proof of concept is really important. And then for us, we chose a cooperative as our business framework because it was best for our organization. So a little bit about what we do now. You know, we started by offering a lot of services, as I mentioned. So, you know, last summer we did cooperative building camp, latch camp, where we teach people skills. We, you know, teach about tools and how to use them, primarily to women who aren't comfortable in those kind of spaces where they don't necessarily have access to comfortable space to learn how to use tools and how to frame in a non-judgmental environment. And you know, we are developing a program called Backyard Connect, which I was talking to Vicki about how you all might be, some of you might be interested in doing some of this, where there's many tiny home owners who want to connect to existing landowners. So we're trying to make that connection so we can utilize the backyard homes, the ADU ordinance, and better locate people within these homes and these spaces. You know, our subscription, we have a subscription service, which basically is, as you can see, we're trying to edit it and adjust as we go, because COVID has required us to become flexible. We can't necessarily do co-building in person as much as we were doing before. It's a lot riskier, especially in Los Angeles, and it's same with in-person, basically all of our in-person events. So we've really tried to use our knowledge and our strengths and focus on them as much as we can, you know, doing webinars, creating digital resources, and doing classes that teach people how to get their journey started. We just had a graduate class, and this is someone who went from really being overwhelmed at everything tiny to designing their own tiny home and being able to present at a public event about their choices and selections and their plan for going forward. And, you know, we have a digital community. We are really community based, and we really enjoy sharing skills and knowledge, but switching to digital platforms to keep communication alive has been really important for us. And having digital spaces like our Latch library, where we can share resources for learning, and that it's basically, as Vicki was saying, if you want to create like some sort of resource collective, like where is it going to live and how is it going to be accessed for us digitally, has become a really great resource. So basically some reflections on this later chapter is we're really working on our strengths and realizing we can't do everything. We really want to offer a lot to our community, but we really have to focus on like what has been strong for us and what does generate revenue, because that is what helps us be able to offer what we offer. So really cutting back down the things that we weren't able to offer sustainably, really collaborating with other organizations that may be able to do those offerings, and having, you know, promoting what they're doing and supporting other businesses that have those, and really being flexible to change. You know, you can have this strong vision, but then you realize, okay, a big, you know, curveball comes. And so having a cooperative of amazing people with different strengths and skill sets, we've been able to ride the storm and be innovative. And so that is basically our little story, and I hope it inspires you to kind of get started on what you all want to do and start the communities that you'd like to form.
Thank you so much, Teresa. That was an excellent presentation and really inspiring. So we are going to go to Q&A, but before that, I do want to show you what we're going to be doing for the breakout groups, because this involves you assigning yourself to a breakout group. So basically, we will ask you to put your name in the chat along with the letter for the breakout group you want to participate in. So you may have seen the first of the polls just pop up, and you can do that as well in this time. So put your name in the chat along with the letter of the breakout group you want to participate in. A is small backyard communities, B is medium-sized cottage developments, and so forth. And the instructions for the breakout groups is you're going to be self-organized, and there possibly could be a volunteer note taker and reporter. Do a very quick round of introductions. Don't go into a lot about why you're in this group, but focus on it briefly so you can get to the questions. And then do the question rounds and select 1 or 2 bullet points for the report back. The 2 questions are, what barriers do you see to forming this type of community, i.e. the community you selected, and what resources are needed to collectively design and build this type of community? So with that, Justine will be putting these in the chat box, these questions, so you'll have reference to them. And with that, I'd like to start the Q&A. And I do have a question for you, Teresa, to start off. And that is whether, how do you generate revenue for your cooperative?
Yes, as previous presenters mentioned, revenue is important even as a cooperative. So for us, we offer a subscription service. So people pay for a subscription for our services. That's one way of generating revenue. Our courses are and our workshops, webinars, and events that we run. So we're primarily educational resources. We also create digital resources. So basically we create content that helps people learn, and community services. So subscribers to the Latch Collective model can then come and access our services for like really, really affordable price for free, and include hands-on experiences and such. So that's how we generate revenue.
Thank you. So I'm looking here. So the names of the breakout groups will be going into the chat, just for those of you who are looking to want it. So I'm looking for other questions here. Maybe we'll go back to this for Jane and Rachel. They did answer in the chat, but there was a question regarding that access to conventional debt financing is limited if the home is financed on leased land. So even community land trusts usually have only a couple local banks willing to provide mortgage loans. And wonder if you could both speak to that here now for the folks. And remember to put out any questions you might have in the chat at this time for the Q&A.
What I've learned about conventional mortgages is more toward the limitation of the fact you can't include the rental income in qualifying. The borrower has to qualify on their own, and then that the property has to appraise out. What we've identified is at least one local person who will work with us to help identify what kind of financing or conventional financing a person might qualify for at some point in their project. And then that in those instances, we could be a bridge to help them get to that point. Sometimes people qualify for more than they're comfortable as a mortgage payment. But if they knew they had a rental income to back that up, they'd be more comfortable taking a higher balance. And I'm not familiar with leased land at all.
Okay, Rachel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Not really. I think, Jane, probably what you shared is a little bit more in-depth and relevant than my knowledge, which is pretty general. But again, just sort of that, you know, like I talked about, lenders are going to be looking at, you know, what's the income, what's the source of money to repay that loan, and they may or may not want to count certain kinds of income like rental income. I also know it is very typical. I just bought a house and, you know, had banks and mortgage lenders willing to lend me way more than I actually wanted to borrow. So that can definitely be a factor.
Okay. I have to interrupt the Q&A here to put up the screen again. I tried to put it in the chat. So we're going to have the breakout groups. And I'm not seeing too many questions come in, but please feel free to provide them and we'll see if we can get them answered in the to follow up for the webinar. And I want to thank our presenters so much. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen here so that you can see what the breakout groups are. Again, we have A, small backyard communities, B, medium-sized cottages, C, larger planned communities. And there's been a lot of talk about the conversion of the golf course to other uses. So that might be something that you might think about in terms of larger planned communities. D is supported transitional villages. And this is supported villages for the homeless in the housing precarious. And finally, senior living villages. So that would be E. So if you could put your name in the chat and along with the letter, and we will start the groups in just a minute. And in the meantime, I'm going to look one last time to see if there are any additional questions in the chat. Okay, I don't see any, but we will be Justine, are you ready to transition us to the chat rooms, the breakout rooms?
It looks like there's still quite a few people who need to sign up. So if you could just put that screen up again and maybe just ask one more question, then I should be able to get there. But I think people need to see the list.
Okay, I will. As usual, I'm switching between screens is oh no, I signed out. No, I didn't. Okay, this is a little bit complicated. Okay, here's the list. Please sign up for your room in the chat.
And I can answer the question that just came in, if you're all right. Do you want me to read it?
Please do that.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
The question was, is the LA ordinance allowance for tiny houses on wheels quite unusual, or are these sort of ordinances becoming more common? And I can answer, at least for for California, you know, the fact that Los Angeles passed it was a great opportunity, as now so many other communities are copy and pasting this. So once you have kind of a model to go by, a lot of communities will be able to more easily reference and learn from that model. So there are, you know, I think almost 10 different municipalities and counties that are legalizing them within the state of California. You know, we are using California's wording for accessory dwelling units. So to copy and paste across the country is sometimes a little bit more difficult, but I think that now that there's the larger cities showing this model, you will see a lot of other cities also exploring this. So it's not at least uncommon now in in California, it's just new.
Okay, I'm going to ask Justine to transition us over to the small groups, and then if people are still around that haven't been assigned, I think you can make a choice about where they go, Justine. And again, thank you to our presenters. It's so awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was nice to meet you all and a pleasure chatting. See you.
Randy and Cheryl, I might have missed which room you wanted to go in. Randy, which one were you interested in?
You're muted, Randy.
A, I wasn't sure how to post it. A.
Okay, great. Here, we're in unassigned A. Here we go. No. How do I do that?
Vicky.
I need to put the questions in, I think, too. Yeah.
I was the only person in room B, so can you put me in A? Or whoever's.
I am trying to figure out how. Yes, I'm
well,
trying.
Why don't you put me into B and we can talk? Sid and I can.
Well, let's pretend that this is B, because I don't think I can actually put people in after they've been opened. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Hi, this is
unfortunately,
Cheryl. This is Cheryl, and I wanted to get into group B, which I think is the Cottage.
Oh,
okay,
good.
Here we are. Let's do that.
All right. Super.
Okay. This is a little bit tricky. Okay. So Cheryl, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Cheryl Ritz, and I've noticed in the peninsula here, basically the Port Hadlock area is where I'm more focused. There really is not affordable housing for rent, and or to buy it if you wanted to, actually, either way. And I know that I've been kind of watching, and I've noticed a few
back from another group. Go ahead and put your bullet points in the chat for us if you have selected somebody, and we'll be reading those. And we're going to do one little last poll here as so if you're coming from another group and you were the reporter, please put your bullet points in the chat so we can share them. Okay, so I participated in the Cottage development group. And one of the things that we talked about is how valuable the education piece was, because there aren't many examples to point to at this point. This is an emerging kind of development, the tiny home communities. And so having more educational events and stories around tiny home communities, I think, is very popular. Point people to the resource that one of the resources is the excellent videos that have been put together by Tiny House Expedition. Alexis presented in the first webinar, and she's been doing a really great job with that, telling the stories of these communities as they appear. And also just people are very much aware of the funding barrier and the density barriers. So I'm not seeing anybody yet who has, okay, and now we have from, I'm not sure, Jane, which group you were in, and that was A, small backyard communities. So there wasn't a lot of time, but they identified that second ADU is not a close possibility in the city. And the land lease from a homeowner is an interesting concept that we think that has some possibilities, but we need to do more research on, and the need to do research possibilities, build out the possibility of private financing to pursue the tiny home on the homeowner's property. And then we have a comment from Mark, and I think there is a simple 2-unit condo process to create a separate legal lot for a tiny home from an existing lot, and this has been done on Bainbridge. So that's a resource to follow up on when we can inform ourselves. I'm wondering if anybody of the other groups have something to share. Maybe we can unmute them if you want to raise your hand. Okay, Group D, which is the transitional housing for homeless individuals. The Community Build Project hopes to be a role model for communicating the culture of care in our community is capable of. And this project will house seniors in 12 shelters. Each shelter will cost around $300,000. And if people want to donate to the project, they can send contributions to Bayside Housing, which is one of the local service providers of housing for the homeless. Volunteers are welcome to join us in the project as it moves to Hadlock in a couple of weeks, and they are currently right off of San Juan doing production building, and we hope to have these shelters occupied by Christmas. So this is referring to the Community Build Project of Jefferson County. You can find that on Facebook, and also there's a page about the project on the Bayside Housing website. Okay, do we have any other groups that have to weigh in? Okay, we're just about at 8 o'clock. We'll summarize these. You're free to add anything you want in the chat now as we wrap this up. I'm hoping you're able to make some beginning questions. And here's the results of the poll, looking at what types of local resource collectives that, what a local resource collective, the things it might provide. So that's a beginning of focusing in on what the groups might do. And what I'd like to do is thank you all for coming tonight, and we hope to see you next month for a very important tiny home communities as supported housing webinar. This is supported housing for the homeless and the unsheltered and the income precarious. That will be on December 16th at the same time. Also, we are planning dates in January for holding interest meetings around starting a resource collective here in Jefferson County that could do some of this resourcing of each other to get these projects on the road. There will be information on these meetings in the follow-up email. And so it'll contain The email will finally contain a post-webinar survey link, but you can take the very short survey now. I think Justine will put that link in the chat. I see it coming up now. So just feel free to say goodbye in the chat, and thanks so much for coming. And I know that was lots of information, but I really appreciated you joining in tonight. So good night, everyone.